The champagne flute in my hand was Waterford crystal cold against my fingertips, but the words my husband just spoke were sharper than any glass. "Sarah, oh God no," Joseph laughed, clapping Paul on the back, the sound echoing off the raw steel beams of the construction site we were standing in. "Sarah couldn't handle the pressure of this industry. She's got her little interior decorating hobby, and that keeps her busy enough." The men around him, Paul, Jared, Sean, all chuckled into their drinks. They were the board of directors for Vanguard Development, the men who supposedly ran this empire. And Joseph, my husband, was their golden boy, the senior project director about to break ground on the Apex Tower, the tallest building on the West Coast. He didn't look at me when he said it. He never did anymore. He just gestured vaguely in my direction with his free hand, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd picked out to match the drapes. "Honestly, boys, it's better this way. I build the skyline, she picks the throw pillows. Everyone stays in their lane." Jared smirked, swirling his scotch. "Must be nice, Joe. Having a wife who doesn't ask too many questions about the budget." "Oh, she doesn't know what a budget is," Joseph sneered, draining his glass. "I give her an allowance for her fabrics, and she stays out of the real work. It's a perfect arrangement." I stood there in my navy silk dress, the wind whipping my hair across my face, watching the man I had married 7 years ago dismantle my dignity for sport. He looked so powerful in his custom Italian suit, standing under the floodlights of the gala, surrounded by the elite of the city. He looked like a king. But kings often forget who built the castle. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my drink in his face, though the urge was a physical ache in my chest. Instead, I took a slow sip of the champagne. It tasted like metal and victory, because Joseph had made a fatal calculation error. He thought silence was weakness. He thought my lack of a title meant a lack of power. He had no idea that the allowance he joked about came from my personal accounts. He had no idea that the real work he was so proud of, the blueprints, the permits, the structural innovations for the Apex Tower, had been approved by a shadow CEO he had never met. A CEO named Sarah. I watched him refill his glass, his laughter booming, his arrogance filling the space like a toxic gas. He was celebrating his promotion to partner, a promotion he thought was a done deal. He thought tonight was his coronation. He was wrong. Tonight was his execution. "Enjoy the night, gentlemen," I said, my voice soft, smooth, cutting through their laughter like a razor blade. Joseph barely glanced at me. Yeah, babe. Go find the buffet or something. The adults are talking." I smiled. It was the kind of smile that should have terrified him, the kind of smile a structural engineer gives right before they detonate a controlled demolition, but he was too drunk on his own ego to see the charges I'd already planted. "Of course, Joseph," I whispered. "I'll leave you to it." I turned and walked away, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the concrete. I didn't go to the buffet. I walked past the catering tents, past the string quartet, past the glittering crowd of investors who had no idea I signed their dividend checks. I found a quiet corner in the shadows of the unfinished lobby, pulled my phone from my clutch, and opened a secure app that only one person in the world had access to. My thumb hovered over the screen. There was no hesitation, no trembling, just the cold mathematical certainty of an equation finally being balanced. I typed 3 words: "Initiate protocol Obsidian." And then I hit send. The screen of my phone glowed with a single pulsing red line. Protocol Obsidian active. It wasn't a panic button, it was a digital guillotine. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and took a deep breath, letting the cold night air fill my lungs. Behind me the gala was in full swing. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi. The champagne was flowing. My husband Joseph was likely accepting congratulations for a project he didn't own, paid for by a bonus he would never receive. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the heartbreak people talk about in movies where the betrayed wife weeps in the bathroom. I felt the cool, detached precision of a surgeon scrubbing in. Protocol Obsidian was a failsafe I had designed 5 years ago. When I first appointed Joseph as the public face of Vanguard Development, I knew the risks. I knew that power is a drug and Joseph had an addictive personality, so I built a backdoor into every single system he touched. A master key that only I held, and I had just turned it. Inside the cloud servers of Vanguard Development, a cascade of automated scripts began to execute. In less than 30 seconds, Joseph's biometric clearance to the company mainframe was revoked. His corporate credit cards, the ones he used to buy his Italian suits, and I suspected gifts for the junior architect Alyssa, were frozen. His email access was severed. The most satisfying part, however, was the asset freeze. I walked toward the valet stand, my heels clicking on the pavement. I didn't need to look back to know what was happening. At this very moment, Joseph's phone would be vibrating in his pocket, a notification from the bank. Transaction declined, or perhaps a login error on his company tablet. He would ignore it at first. He would think it was a glitch. He would blame the reception or the IT department. He wouldn't realize that he had just become a ghost in his own life. "Miss Sarah?" the valet asked, holding open the door of my modest sedan. It was another prop, of course. The interior decorator's car. Joseph drove a company-leased Aston Martin. I drove a Honda because it fit the narrative of the supportive, less successful wife. "Thank you, Thomas," I said, sliding into the driver's seat. I glanced at the side mirror. Through the glass walls of the unfinished lobby, I could see Joseph. He was holding his phone up, frowning at the screen. He tapped it aggressively, then shook it as if physical force could fix a systemic lockout. He looked annoyed, not scared, not yet. He had no idea that the allowance he mocked the money I supposedly used for throw pillows and fabric swatches was actually a dividend payout from my personal trust, a trust that owned 51% of Vanguard's voting stock. He had no idea that the real work he claimed to do was merely project management, while the architectural designs, the structural engineering feats, and the city permits were all secured by me, working under the pseudonym S.V. Sterling. S.V. Sterling. The ghost architect. The name on every blueprint Joseph had ever presented. He thought it was a reclusive old man in Zurich. He never once suspected that the initials stood for Sarah Vanguard Sterling. I put the car in gear. I didn't go home. I couldn't go back to the house we shared, the house that smelled like his cologne and my silence. I drove toward the city, toward the real headquarters of Vanguard, the one Joseph didn't know existed. The gala was merely a facade. The steel beams of the apex tower were real, but the man celebrating beneath them was a hologram. And I had just pulled the plug. As I merged onto the highway, a notification pinged on my dashboard display. It was a text from Joseph. "Card isn't working. Probably a fraud alert. Transfer $5,000 to the joint account. I'm taking the boys out after this." I stared at the message. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, as his world was collapsing, his first instinct was to demand resources from the wife he deemed useless. I didn't reply. I simply deleted the thread. Tonight he would be embarrassed when the bill came. Tomorrow he would be destroyed. The dashboard clock read 11:42 at night as I pulled into the underground garage of the Sterling building. It was an unassuming structure compared to the glass giants downtown, but it housed the nerve center of my operations. I took the private elevator to the penthouse office. The lights flickered on, automatically illuminating walls covered in framed blueprints. Not Joseph's blueprints. Mine. I walked over to the drafting table in the corner. It was the same table my father had given me when I graduated from architecture school at 22, top of my class, brimming with ideas that would reshape the skyline. Back then I was Sarah Sterling, heiress to a modest construction fortune and cursed with a brilliant mind in a man's world. I remembered the first time I pitched the concept for the Skybridge complex to a room full of investors. They didn't look at my designs, they looked at my legs. They asked who my father was. One of them, a man named Paul, the same Paul who was currently drinking scotch with my husband, had patted my hand and said, "Sweetheart, let the men handle the steel. You worry about the drapes." That moment didn't break me, it radicalized me. I realized then that if I wanted my buildings to exist, I had to separate the creation from the creator. I needed a face. A man's face. Someone handsome, charismatic, and ambitious enough to sell the vision but not smart enough to question the engineering. Enter Joseph. He was a mid-level project manager when I met him. Charming, hungry, and completely average. He had the jawline of a CEO and the strategic depth of a puddle. I courted him, married him, and then I built him. I created Vanguard Development as a shell company owned by a blind trust. I appointed Joseph as the public face, the senior project director. And then I became the ghost. Every night for 7 years I waited until Joseph fell asleep. Then I would slip out of bed, go to my home studio, which he thought was a craft room, and work until dawn. I designed the structural integrity of the Azure Towers. I calculated the wind load resistance for the Millennium Spire. I drafted the zoning permits, the budget allocations, the environmental impact reports. In the morning, I would leave the files on the kitchen counter with a note. "Honey, I found these notes from the consultants in Zurich. You should look them over." And Joseph, bless his arrogant heart, never questioned it. He assumed he was a genius who just attracted good luck. He took the files, presented them as his own, and basked in the applause. I watched from the sidelines. I played the role of the supportive, slightly dim-witted wife. I nodded when he explained basic concepts to me. I accepted the allowance he gave me from the profits I generated. It was a trade-off. The architect's paradox. To see my creations rise, I had to let my name fall. I accepted the invisibility because I loved the work more than the glory. I told myself it was worth it to see the steel go up, to see the city change because of my mind, even if no one knew it. But Joseph had broken the contract. He had mistaken my sacrifice for incompetence. He had mistaken my silence for stupidity, and tonight he had tried to erase me completely. I walked over to the wall safe and pressed my thumb against the scanner. It beeped and popped open. Inside was a single leather-bound ledger. This was the poisoned gift. For the last 2 years, as Joseph's ego inflated, he had started getting greedy. He wanted to feel like a real boss. So he started requesting discretionary funds for site management. I knew what he was doing. He was skimming. He was moving money into offshore accounts, buying gifts for Alyssa, funding a lifestyle his salary couldn't support. Most wives would have stopped him. I didn't. I approved every single request. I signed off on the transfers as the anonymous owner. I let him take 50,000 here, 100,000 there. I let him build a paper trail of embezzlement so long and so detailed that it would take a forensic accountant 5 minutes to put him in prison for 20 years. I wasn't just his victim, I was his enabler. I handed him the shovel, pointed to the soft earth, and watched him dig his own grave. I ran my hand over the ledger. Tomorrow morning, I wouldn't just be divorcing a cheating husband. I would be prosecuting a felon. The phone on my desk buzzed. It was a secure line. "Miss Sterling," a voice asked. It was Jared, one of the board members. He sounded terrified. We received the protocol obsidian alert. The system says Joseph has been locked out. What is going on?" I picked up the receiver. My voice was calm, authoritative, the voice Sarah Sterling used when she wasn't pretending to be a decorator. "Good evening, Jared," I said. "I think it's time we had a board meeting. 8 a.m. Don't be late." I hung up. The ghost was done haunting the machine. It was time to possess it. I sat in the silence of my penthouse office, the leather-bound ledger resting heavy on my lap. The numbers on the page were damning wire transfers to consulting firms that didn't exist, invoices for materials that were never delivered. But it wasn't the theft that made my blood run cold. It was the memory of what had happened just 1 hour ago, 20 minutes before I initiated the protocol. The public insult in front of the board hadn't been the trigger. It was just the debris from the explosion that had already happened on the balcony. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. The gala, 8:45 at night. I had stepped out onto the VIP terrace to escape the noise. The air smelled of expensive perfume and damp concrete. I was looking at the skeleton of the Apex Tower, feeling a swell of pride when the door banged open. It was Joseph. He was flushed, his eyes glassy with too much scotch and adrenaline. He spotted me and stumbled over, not with affection but with the aggressive energy of a man who feels invincible. "There you are," he slurred, slightly cornering me against the railing. "Hiding again. You always shrink when the lights get bright, Sarah. It's embarrassing." "I'm just getting some air, Joseph," I said calmly. "You seem to be enjoying yourself." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Enjoying myself? I'm owning the room, Sarah. I'm the king of this city. Paul just told me the partnership is a lock." "A lock." He leaned in close, his breath hot and boozy against my ear. "And you know what that means? It means the bonus is clearing next week. $2 million net." "That's a lot of money," I said, my voice neutral. "It is," he sneered. "Enough to finally trim the fat." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" He gripped my upper arm, his fingers digging into the silk of my dress. It wasn't quite painful, but it was possessive. Dominating. "It means we're done, Sarah. You and me." The words hung in the humid air. I didn't blink. "You're leaving me." "Don't look so shocked," he scoffed. "Look at us. I'm building empires. What are you doing, picking out beige swatches for guest rooms? You're dead weight, Sarah. You're a nice little anchor, but I need to fly." He let go of my arm and leaned back against the railing, looking up at the tower I had designed. "Alyssa gets it," he said, saying the name I had suspected for months. Alyssa. The 24-year-old junior architect. She has vision. She has fire. She's not a cute little hobbyist like you. He turned back to me, a cruel grin twisting his face. So enjoy the party, babe. Because once that check clears on Monday, you're going back to your parents' house and I'm moving into the penthouse. He patted my cheek, a patronizing, dismissive tap. Don't worry, I'll write you a check. I'm generous. Present time, the penthouse office. I opened my eyes. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the server banks in the next room. He thought he was discarding me. He thought the $2 million bonus was his escape hatch. He didn't know that the bonus was actually a trap I had baited. I had personally approved the allocation of those funds into a holding account that was flagged by the SEC for money laundering, an account he had set up. He wasn't waiting for a payout. He was waiting for an indictment. I looked down at the ledger one last time. He wanted to trim the fat. He wanted to fly. I picked up my secure phone. A notification blinked on the screen. It was from the head of security at the gala. Subject is attempting to leave the premises. Card declined at valet. He is creating a disturbance. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that reflected in the darkened window. Let him scream, I whispered to the empty room. I stood up and walked to the wall of windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there in the glittering lights, Joseph was realizing that his credit cards were plastic scraps and his access badge was just a piece of plastic. He wanted a divorce. I would give him something much more permanent. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Security, this is Sarah Sterling. Prepare the conference room. And make sure the police have the side entrance clear. We're going to have a guest. The next morning the sun hit Joseph's face like a physical assault. He groaned, shielding his eyes, the hangover from the gala pounding a steady rhythm against his skull. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen. Still no service. Account suspended. He cursed, tossing the device onto the duvet. Useless IT department, he muttered. I'm firing the whole team the second I sign the partnership papers. He wasn't worried. In Joseph's mind, the world didn't break. It just occasionally stuttered before bending back to his will. The declined cards, the locked phone, it was clearly a system-wide glitch, probably a security update gone wrong. Annoying but temporary. He dragged himself out of bed and into the shower. The hot water helped clear the fog of scotch and arrogance. By the time he was knotting his silk tie in the mirror, he had reconstructed his reality. The glitch was actually a good sign, he decided. They were probably updating his clearance levels for the promotion, upgrading him to partner status. He checked his personal phone, a backup device he kept for private calls with Alyssa. There was a single text message from Jared, the board director. Boardroom, 8 a.m. sharp. Joseph smiled at his reflection. This was it, the coronation. Sorry, Sarah, he said to the empty room, adjusting his cufflinks. Looks like you're getting left behind a little sooner than planned. He drove to the Vanguard headquarters, bypassing the employee garage and parking the Aston Martin directly in the CEO's reserved spot. It was a power move. A statement. He strode into the lobby, expecting the usual flurry of greetings. Good morning, Mr. Harper. Right this way, sir. Instead, the lobby was eerily quiet. The receptionist, a young woman he usually winked at, refused to meet his eyes. She was typing furiously, her shoulders hunched. The security guard, a burly man named Mike, watched him with an expression that wasn't respect. It looked like pity. Morning, Mike, Joseph called out, breezy and confident. Keep the riffraff out today. Big meetings. Mike didn't answer. He just tapped his earpiece and murmured something into his collar. Joseph ignored him. He stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. He hummed to himself as the numbers climbed. He pictured the scene waiting for him, champagne on ice, contracts on the table, the boys clapping him on the back, to the new king of the skyline. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The hallway was silent. The glass walls of the conference room were frosted opaque, hiding the interior. Joseph fixed his jacket, flashed his winning smile, and pushed the double doors open. All right, gentlemen, he boomed, striding in. Let's get this. The words died in his throat. There was no champagne. There were no smiles. Paul, Jared, and Sean sat along the sides of the massive mahogany table. They looked pale, like men who had just witnessed a natural disaster. Jared was wiping sweat from his forehead. Sean was staring at his hands. And at the head of the table, in the chair of the board, the seat that had remained empty for 7 years because the owner was in Zurich, sat a woman. She wasn't wearing the beige cardigans or floral dresses Joseph hated. She was wearing a charcoal suit sharp as a knife's edge. Her hair was pulled back severe and commanding. She was reading a file, her pen hovering over the page. She didn't look up as he entered. Joseph blinked. His brain stuttered, trying to process the image. It was like seeing a dog walking on its hind legs or the sun rising in the west. It was impossible. "Sarah," he laughed, a nervous, confused sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. "Babe, what are you doing here? Did you bring me coffee? You can't be in here, honey. This is the boardroom." The woman at the head of the table finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, dark, and utterly unfamiliar. "Sit down, Joseph," she said. It wasn't a request. Joseph froze, his smile faltering into a rictus of confusion. He looked at Paul, Jared, Sean. They didn't meet his eyes. They were staring at their laps, looking like schoolboys caught cheating on a test. "Sarah, seriously," Joseph chuckled, though the sound was thin, strained. "This is cute, but we have actual business to discuss. The partnership papers. Did you redecorate the room or something? Is that why you're sitting there?" I closed the file I was reading. It made a sharp thwack sound that echoed in the silence. "There are no partnership papers, Joseph," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. "And I'm sitting here because I own the chair. And the table. And the building. And the company." Joseph blinked rapidly. "What, you? You own Vanguard? That's impossible. Vanguard is owned by a Swiss trust. S.V. Sterling." S.V. Sterling, I repeated. "Sarah, Vanguard, Sterling." I watched the realization hit him. It was slow at first, like a crack, spreading across a windshield. He looked at the blueprints on the wall, the same blueprints he had claimed were his. He looked at the men around him, the men who had known the truth for the last hour and were now terrified of the woman who signed their paychecks. "No," he whispered. "No, you're just a decorator. You pick out throw pillows." "I pick out everything, Joseph," I said, leaning forward. "I picked out the site for the Apex Tower. I picked out the structural steel grade. And 7 years ago, I picked out a face for my company because I knew the industry wouldn't respect a 24-year-old woman." I stood up. "I built you, Joseph. I gave you the scripts, the plans, the credit. I made you a king because I needed a figurehead. But figureheads are replaceable." Joseph's face turned a mottled red. You lied to me. For 7 years, you played me." "I protected my investment," I corrected him coldly. "And frankly, you were a decent investment. Until you started stealing from me." I pressed a button on the remote. The wall screen behind me lit up. It wasn't a PowerPoint presentation. It was a forensic accounting report. Joseph stared at the screen. Rows of numbers, dates, and wire transfers. Transfers to Consulting Group Alpha. Transfers to J.H. Site Services. Transfers that matched the down payments on a condo in the Marina District, a condo listed under the name Alyssa. $500,000, I said. Embezzled over 24 months. Joseph let out a strangled laugh. "You can't prove that I approved those expenses. As senior project director, I have discretion." "You have discretion," I interrupted, "because I gave it to you." This was the moment. The twist of the knife. "Did you really think the accounting department just missed $500,000? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Did you think you were that clever?" I walked around the table, approaching him. He backed away slightly, hitting the edge of the mahogany table. "I approved every single one of those transfers personally, Joseph. Every time you requested site management funds, the request came to my private server, and I clicked approve." His eyes widened. "What?" "I knew what you were doing 2 years ago," I said. "I knew about the money. I knew about Alyssa. I could have fired you then, but firing you for incompetence is just a severance package. Firing you for grand larceny, that's a prison sentence." I stopped right in front of him. I was close enough to smell the stale alcohol on his breath, the fear radiating off him in waves. "I didn't just catch you, Joseph. I fed you. I gave you enough rope to hang yourself, and you tied the noose with both hands." Joseph looked at the screen, then back at me. He looked at the boys' club board members, realizing they weren't his friends, they were witnesses. "Sarah," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Sarah, wait. We can fix this. I can pay it back. The bonus." "The bonus," I said, a cruel smile touching my lips. The bonus you were going to use to leave me, the bonus you were going to use to start a new life with the girl whose work you're stealing. I shook my head. There is no bonus, Joseph. That money is currently in an escrow account managed by the district attorney's office. Along with this ledger, I tossed the leather-bound book onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of him. You wanted to trim the fat, I asked, echoing his words from the balcony. You wanted to fly. I pointed to the door. Start flapping. Joseph tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat like broken glass. His face was a mask of sheer panic, the arrogant mask shattering into 1,000 pieces. Sarah, please, he croaked, his voice thin and desperate. We're married. You can't send me to prison. Think about us. Think about the life we built. The life I built, I corrected him, my voice devoid of emotion. You were just a tenant, Joseph. And you missed rent. He stumbled back, his legs hitting a chair. I can fix this. I know she meant nothing, I said calmly, because you're incapable of caring about anyone but yourself, and that is why you're failing right now. Not because you got caught, but because your brain cannot process a reality where I am more powerful than you. I walked closer, my voice dropping to a clinical, almost academic tone. This was the narcissistic collapse. I had read about it, studied it, but seeing it in real time was fascinating. His grandiose self-image was colliding with the undeniable fact of his inferiority, and his psyche was short-circuiting. You're freezing up, Joseph, I whispered. You can't breathe, you can't think, because for 7 years you built your entire ego on the lie that you were the genius and I was the accessory. And now that the lie is gone, you realize there's nothing underneath. You're hollow. He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. A sob escaped him, a jagged, ugly sound. I felt nothing. No pity. No satisfaction. Just the cold finality of a demolition order being signed. I turned to the board members. Paul, Jared, Sean. You enabled him. You laughed at his jokes about my incompetence. You drank his scotch and ignored the red flags because the money was good. They flinched as one. You're not fired, I said, watching hope flare in their eyes. Not yet. But from this moment on, you report directly to me. Every expense, every email, every breath you take goes through my office. If you step 1 inch out of line, you join Joseph in the cell block. Do we understand each other? Yes, Miss Sterling, Paul whispered, looking at the floor. Good. I pressed the intercom button. Security. You can come in now. The doors opened and 2 uniformed guards entered. They didn't look at Joseph with respect anymore. They looked at him like he was trash that needed to be taken out. Escort Mr. Harper off the premises, I ordered. And hand him over to the detectives waiting in the lobby. Joseph looked up, tears streaming down his face. Sarah. Goodbye, Joseph, I said, turning my back on him. I heard the scuffle of feet, the low murmur of the guards, and then the heavy thud of the doors closing. The silence that followed was heavy but clean, like the air after a storm. I walked to the window. Down below, I saw a police cruiser waiting. I watched as they led Joseph out in handcuffs, his head bowed, his tailored suit looking like a costume he had outgrown. It was over. I left the boardroom and took the elevator down to the ground floor. I didn't stop at the lobby. I walked out the side exit towards the construction site of the Apex Tower. The morning sun was hitting the steel skeleton, turning it gold. The air smelled of wet concrete and promise. I put on a hard hat, not a pink one, not a visitor hat, but a white one with owner stenciled on the front. I walked to the edge of the foundation pit where the concrete was still curing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored card. Sarah Harper. Interior Design Consultant. I looked at it one last time, the name of a woman who didn't exist, a woman who had made herself small so a small man could feel big. I dropped the card into the wet cement. It landed with a soft plip and was swallowed by the gray sludge. My name is Sarah Sterling, I said, to the wind and the steel. I turned and walked back toward my building, my heels clicking a steady, powerful rhythm on the pavement. The ghost was gone. The architect had arrived. If you've ever had to build in silence while others took the credit, share this story. It's time to put your name on your own work.